The apartment residents who drank corpse-contaminated water for 5 years is a shocking Hong Kong criminal case and one of the most disturbing recent cases in China. With elements resembling a horror detective story, the case revealed a horrifying truth: residents had unknowingly been using water contaminated by a decomposing body for 5 years. This chilling mystery left the public stunned and deeply disturbed. On January 13, 1985, a Sunday, residents of an apartment building on To Kwa Wan Road in Kowloon, Hong Kong, gathered together to discuss a troubling issue. It turned out that since the previous month, all the toilets in the building had been behaving as if they were haunted. They would occasionally stop working, especially on weekends when water consumption was at its highest. Residents often had to wait in long lines just to use the restroom, leading to widespread frustration and complaints. That morning, the situation became even worse. Not a single drop of water was available in the toilets, severely disrupting daily life. Having reached their limit, the residents decided to hold a meeting to find a solution. After some discussion, everyone agreed that the problem was likely caused by the rooftop water tank, which had not been cleaned for a long time. They believed that accumulated mud and debris were clogging the system. The residents pooled their money and hired 2 maintenance workers to clean the tank immediately. The workers climbed to the rooftop, opened the water tank, and inspected the inside. They also concluded that the blockage was probably caused by a buildup of mud and sediment. Soon afterward, they began the cleaning process. At around 9:15 a.m., after nearly half an hour of pumping water out of the tank, most of the water had been drained. The 2 workers then put on protective gear and climbed inside. While cleaning the bottom of the tank, one of the workers discovered a round object covered in thick black sludge. Unable to identify what it was, he casually handed it to his coworker. The second worker took the object, examined it more closely, and suddenly let out a terrified scream. It was a human skull. After receiving the report, the Kowloon police arrived at the scene immediately and began preparing to recover everything from the water tank. During their investigation, officers noticed what appeared to be an object buried inside a large block of concrete at the bottom of the tank. Realizing that specialized equipment would be needed, they requested assistance from the fire department. A short time later, firefighters carefully cut open the concrete block. What they discovered inside was shocking. Embedded within the concrete were 3 yellow suitcases, deliberately weighted down and hidden deep beneath the tank. After the suitcases were retrieved and opened, investigators found numerous human bone fragments inside each one. A preliminary examination indicated that the victim had been dead for many years. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, the exact cause of death could not be determined. The search of the water tank also uncovered several other items, including bed sheets, a folding chair, and a birdcage. These objects appeared to have been discarded along with the remains, though their significance was still unclear. Then, while examining one of the compartments inside a suitcase, investigators made another important discovery. They found a photograph. Because it had been submerged in water for such a long time, the image on the photograph had become badly faded and was almost impossible to recognize. Only the writing on the back remained partially legible. After careful forensic analysis, investigators determined that 3 Chinese characters were written on the reverse side of the photograph. The middle character was "Yin." Although the complete inscription could not be fully identified, it provided one of the few potential clues available to the investigators. Police believed that the items recovered from the water tank likely belonged to the deceased. The photograph was also thought to be a picture of the victim. Investigators initially suspected that the killer had been in such a hurry while disposing of the body that they had overlooked this photograph and accidentally left it behind. As news of the discovery spread, shock and panic swept through the apartment building. The residents were horrified to realize that the water they had been drinking and using for years had come from the very tank that concealed a human corpse. Some people became physically ill and began vomiting on the spot. Others immediately started packing their belongings, determined to move out as soon as possible. For many residents, the thought that they had unknowingly consumed water contaminated by human remains for years was simply too terrifying to bear. 2 days later, on January 15, forensic specialists successfully reconstructed the skeletal remains. Their examination revealed that the victim was a male between 25 and 40 years old, approximately 1.65 meters tall. The estimated time of death was around 5 years earlier. The exact cause of death could not be determined due to the condition of the remains. However, investigators discovered clear-cut marks on the right side of the body, indicating the use of a sharp weapon. Based on the evidence, police concluded that the victim had been murdered, dismembered, and then concealed inside the rooftop water tank. On January 16, detectives began to suspect that the victim might have had a connection to the residents of the apartment building. As a result, they summoned all residents to the police station and interviewed them one by one. During the investigation, officers learned that a man had indeed disappeared from the building about 5 years earlier. His physical characteristics closely matched those of the victim. The missing man was identified as Deng Yingjie, a 33-year-old resident. At the time of his disappearance, he was reportedly associated with the notorious Hong Kong triad gang known as the Fire Prosperity Society, Huasheng, a criminal organization with a fearsome reputation in Hong Kong's underworld. Known for his courage, fighting skills, and quick reflexes, Deng Yingjie had risen through the ranks of the gang and eventually became one of its most trusted enforcers. Within the organization, he enjoyed considerable status and influence. At the age of 29, however, he was seriously injured during a violent confrontation. After recovering from his injuries, he reportedly began to reconsider his life in the criminal underworld and developed a desire to leave the gang behind. According to residents of the apartment building, his lifestyle changed noticeably afterward. He often spent his days wandering around the residential complex and had developed a fondness for keeping birds. It was common to see him carrying a birdcage while taking leisurely walks through the neighborhood. Investigators then turned their attention to the photograph recovered from the water tank. Although most of the writing had faded, forensic analysis showed that the second character in the name written on the back was Ying, the same middle character found in Deng Yingjie's name. As detectives compared the evidence, more and more details appeared to align. The victim's estimated age, personal habits, disappearance date, and the recovered belongings all matched Deng Yingjie's profile. The birdcage found in the tank was particularly significant, as it corresponded with a hobby that many residents remembered him having before he vanished. Taken together, these clues strongly suggested that the remains hidden inside the water tank belonged to Deng Yingjie. As a result, the police immediately contacted Deng Yingjie's family and asked them to assist with the investigation. After examining the recovered photograph and the personal belongings found inside the water tank, the family confirmed that the items had indeed belonged to Deng. With this crucial identification, investigators were finally able to establish that the victim was Deng Yingjie, the man who had disappeared 5 years earlier. The news quickly spread throughout the neighborhood, causing a major stir among local residents. While many were shocked by the revelation, some appeared strangely satisfied, as if the victim's identity had confirmed long-held suspicions or resentments. As detectives dug deeper into Deng's background, they discovered that he had been a notorious figure within the apartment complex. Following the severe injuries he sustained during a gang-related fight, Deng reportedly suffered long-term complications that resulted in sexual dysfunction. The condition left him deeply insecure and affected his self-esteem. However, rather than keeping the matter private, his pride and arrogance prevented him from showing vulnerability. According to witnesses, he frequently boasted about the issue in an exaggerated and attention-seeking manner. His behavior became increasingly disruptive, drawing criticism and resentment from many of the people who lived around him. Over time, Deng developed a reputation as a controversial and unpopular resident, a fact that would later become an important consideration in the investigation into his death. Known for his promiscuous behavior, Deng Yingjie often claimed to have multiple girlfriends. However, residents reported that he frequently harassed women in the apartment complex. His behavior allegedly included inappropriate physical contact and indecent acts in public spaces, which left many residents feeling unsafe and distressed. In addition to these actions, he was also said to have exposed himself in public on more than one occasion. Despite widespread fear and anger among the neighbors, few dared to speak out, as many believed he had ties to criminal networks. Out of fear of retaliation, they remained silent, harboring resentment privately. After the 1980s, this so-called figure of misfortune suddenly disappeared without a trace. Deng's father reported his disappearance to the police, but due to the hostility of the neighbors and the lack of cooperation, no useful information could be obtained. With no solid leads and considering Deng's criminal background, investigators initially assumed that he had fled to escape enemies or retribution. As a result, the case gradually went cold and was eventually forgotten over time. The landlord of Deng Yingjie stated that 5 years earlier, Deng had suddenly disappeared, leaving behind a significant amount of unpaid rent. The landlord searched everywhere but found no trace of him and eventually had no choice but to give up. Following this, police expanded their investigation into Deng's relationships and social connections. Due to his background, many residents speculated that he might have been killed by someone involved in triad-related conflicts seeking revenge. However, investigators did not agree with this theory. Having spent years dealing with organized crime cases, they were familiar with the typical methods used by triad groups. In most cases, such organizations operated in a highly efficient and methodical manner, attacking swiftly, disposing of bodies at sea, and leaving minimal traces. In contrast, Deng's body had been dismembered, concealed in suitcases, and hidden inside a rooftop water tank. In addition, some of his personal belongings were scattered at the scene. This suggested a lack of professional coordination. The killer likely had no access to proper transportation and acted in a panicked and disorganized state while disposing of the body. Based on this, police concluded that the murder was likely a crime of sudden impulse, and that the perpetrator was someone who had lived in the apartment building 5 years earlier. On January 20th, police summoned the residents once again to gather more information about tenants who had lived there at the time of the disappearance. Although the building was large, population turnover over the past 5 years had been relatively low. Only 2 households had moved out, a couple surnamed Chan, and a young couple. The Chan couple had left in November 1983, claiming they were emigrating to the United Kingdom to reunite with their son. The young couple had reportedly moved out in May 1980, saying they had been allocated new housing. However, further investigation revealed inconsistencies. Records showed that the young couple had actually been assigned new housing in 1982, 2 years after their claimed departure. This meant they had lied about both the timing and the reason for moving out, and had left the building shortly after Deng Yingjie's murder. As a result, they became primary suspects. The couple was identified as Ng Wu Chuk Tai and Liang Yukfang. At the time of the incident, Wu was 22 years old and worked as a chef, while his girlfriend was the same age. Despite being in their early 20s, they already had a 3-year-old son. According to neighbors, Wu often left home early and returned late due to work, while Yukfang stayed at home managing the household. Because of Deng Yingjie's womanizing and aggressive behavior, he naturally did not leave Liang Yukfang alone. He frequently harassed and molested her, openly and without restraint. Yukfang suffered greatly and repeatedly cried to her boyfriend about the abuse. Normally, Wu was described as gentle and submissive, but witnessing his girlfriend being humiliated eventually pushed him past his limit. Each time Deng harassed her, Wu confronted him, and tensions between the 2 men gradually escalated. At this point in the investigation, police believed they had identified a clear motive for the crime. The following day, officers traveled to their residence in Yaotong village. However, upon arrival, they were shocked by what they saw. As soon as they entered the house, they noticed an altar in the living room with a photograph of a young woman placed upon it. Wu was standing nearby, muttering to himself, "Karma, this is all karma. I killed Ah Fong." When he saw the police, Wu did not resist. Instead, he confessed in detail to the entire crime committed 5 years earlier alongside his girlfriend. After hearing his statement, investigators were stunned. It turned out that this couple was not cold-blooded criminals, but ordinary people pushed to the brink by oppressive circumstances, ultimately forced into violence. In early 1979, Wu, then 17, met Liang Yukfang, who was the same age. The two quickly fell in love. 6 months later, they moved in together into a small room of less than 10 square meters on the 7th floor of the apartment building on to Kwa Wan Road. With his skills as a chef, Ng Woo Chuk-tai was able to secure a stable job relatively easily. Proud of being a responsible man, he chose to let his girlfriend stay at home while he worked hard to support the family. Not long after they moved into the new apartment, Leung Yukfong became pregnant. This further strengthened Woo's decision to let her remain at home, despite their already difficult financial situation. Even though life was not easy, as long as they were together, they felt content and hopeful. They believed that time would simply pass, and one day they would marry, raise their child, and spend the rest of their lives in that small apartment. However, they never expected that an uninvited presence would intrude into their peaceful life and completely turn everything upside down. The apartment itself was extremely modest, consisting of only a single bed and a simple cooking area, with no private bathroom. For basic needs such as bathing, washing, or using the toilet, they had to rely on a shared public bathhouse. The door to their room was nothing more than a bamboo curtain, enough to provide minimal privacy, but far from sufficient protection against ill intentions. Because Wu worked as a chef and often left early and returned late, Deng Yingjie, an unemployed man with too much free time, began to take notice of the young and attractive Leung Yukfong. He soon developed malicious intentions toward her. At first, he would secretly peep at her through the gaps in the curtain. Eventually, his behavior escalated, he even followed her to the public bathhouse, spying on her while she bathed or used the facilities. Deng was not only a vulgar man who exposed himself in public, but also someone with a disturbing obsession for voyeurism. Worse still, he seemed to take pleasure in deliberately letting his victims realize they were being watched. Leung quickly realized his intentions. However, being pregnant and physically vulnerable, she could not directly confront him. Out of fear, she endured the harassment in silence. Only when her boyfriend returned home at night did she finally tell him everything. Enraged by what he heard, Wu could no longer tolerate the situation. Even knowing Deng's criminal reputation, he decided to confront him directly to protect his girlfriend. But Deng showed no remorse. Instead, his behavior became even more brazen. He would openly intrude into the bathroom while Leung was using it, exposing himself and staring at her without shame. In a particularly humiliating incident, he even suggested in front of other tenants that Wu should lend Leung to him for a few days. When Wu confronted him, Deng mocked him, telling him not to be petty and even shamelessly claiming that Leung might help cure his sexual dysfunction. The couple's anger and despair grew steadily under Deng's constant provocation. Although they desperately wanted to move away from this toxic environment, they had borrowed money to pay a full year's rent in advance. If they left early, the landlord would not refund the remaining rent. Financially trapped and emotionally exhausted, they had no choice but to stay. However, their endurance did not bring them peace. 1 month later, things escalated further. While Leung was cooking in the kitchen, Deng suddenly broke in and sexually assaulted her. He tore her clothes and attempted to violate her. Leung resisted with all her strength and managed to escape into another room, but Deng blocked the doorway, hurling insults and obscene remarks. By then, all other tenants were out working, leaving her alone and terrified. Overwhelmed with fear, she collapsed to the ground, trembling and crying, desperately trying to push the door closed. That evening, when Wu returned home and learned what had happened, he finally made up his mind. He decided he could no longer remain passive. On April 5th, Tomb Sweeping Day, Wu took the day off work. Early that morning, gathering all his courage, he stormed into Deng Yingjie's room and warned him loudly. "If you ever touch Na Fong again, I won't be so polite next time." Deng glanced at him coldly, then sneered with contempt. "She came to my bed herself. I wasn't even interested in her. Who told that woman to crawl into my blanket?" Unable to tolerate the humiliation any longer, Wu erupted in anger. The two began to argue fiercely, their voices rising until the confrontation became violent. Deng, who had long looked down on Wu, was now even more enraged after being challenged and provoked. He suddenly sprang up and tried to attack. However, although Deng had once been a feared enforcer, he was now in his 30s and no longer as quick or strong as before. He was quickly overpowered and beaten down by Wu, eventually forced to kneel and beg for mercy. Wu, having vented his anger, turned to leave. But less than 5 minutes later, the curtain suddenly ripped open. Deng Yingjie appeared again, this time holding a 45-centimeter-long kitchen knife, advancing aggressively toward Wu. At that moment, Deng had made up his mind, he was going to kill the young man who had dared to defy him. Wu Chuktai silently thanked his lucky stars that his girlfriend was not at home. In order to save his life, he tried to wrest the knife from Deng Yingjie's hand. The two men struggled violently inside the cramped room. However, because Deng was armed, Wu gradually found himself at a disadvantage. At the critical moment, Liang Yukfang suddenly rushed into the room. Without hesitation, she grabbed a folding chair and struck Deng hard on the back of his head. In an instant, Deng collapsed to the ground, unconscious. At that moment, Wu completely lost control of his emotions. He picked up the kitchen knife and stabbed Deng repeatedly. The floor was quickly soaked in dark red blood. Terrified by the scene, Liang felt severe abdominal pain and ran into the bathroom, vomiting uncontrollably. After some time, Wu slowly regained his senses. Looking at the blood-covered floor, he was overwhelmed with fear and confusion, unsure of what to do next. He briefly considered turning himself in, but he was still young, and his girlfriend was pregnant. Could he really destroy his entire future over a violent criminal? After sitting on the floor in silence for a long time, the young couple began to clean up the scene. With no experience in disposing of a body, they decided to dismember it and conceal the remains. Wu found 3 suitcases in Deng Yingjie's room and placed the body parts inside before filling them with concrete. However, one of the arms had already become too stiff to fit, forcing him to saw off the right arm before placing it inside. Everything happened in such a rush and state of panic that they failed to check the belongings inside the suitcases. This oversight ultimately allowed police to later identify the victim through the photograph found inside. After finishing the disposal, they realized the 3 suitcases were still highly suspicious and difficult to move without being noticed. To dispose of them elsewhere was nearly impossible. Tuqua Wan Road was a busy and densely populated area, and they had no vehicle to transport the heavy remains. In the end, they decided to use the rooftop water tank. Wu believed that few people would ever inspect the tank. By sealing the suitcases in concrete and placing them at the bottom, they would remain hidden forever. To avoid suspicion, they chose a time when water usage was at its lowest. In the early morning of April 6, they successfully concealed the 3 suitcases at the bottom of the water tank. However, when they returned to their room, they realized there were still blood-stained items left behind, including the birdcage that had not yet been disposed of. Wu quickly wiped away the blood with a shirt, then wrapped the remaining contaminated items, such as the birdcage and folding chair, in bed sheets before throwing them into the water tank as well. Deng Yingjie had always been a violent and domineering figure, and few people in the building liked him. After his disappearance, although residents were somewhat surprised, many secretly felt relieved. Life became quieter, and no one wished to get involved. Even when Deng's father later reported the disappearance to the police, residents refused to cooperate, and the investigation made no progress. Eventually, his room was rented out to someone else. A month later, in May 1980, the couple could no longer bear the psychological burden of living above a hidden body. They claimed they had been allocated new housing and moved away from Tuqua Wan Road, settling in a wooden house in Yaoqiwan. There, they got married and had a daughter. In 1982, they were truly assigned public housing and moved into a more spacious and comfortable apartment. Life gradually improved, and for a time, it seemed as though they had finally escaped the shadow of Deng Yingjie. However, a series of strange and unsettling events began to disturb the fragile peace of the 3-person family. In September 1984, Liang Yukfang started showing signs of psychological instability. She frequently had nightmares in which she saw Deng Yingjie lying in a pool of blood on the floor. Wu Chuktai himself also began experiencing repeated dreams in which Deng appeared, claiming he would come back for revenge and demand the life of their daughter. Deeply shaken, Liang decided to visit Wong Tai Sin Temple to pray for peace and protection for her family. However, when she drew her fortune slip, she was stunned. It was an extremely ominous sign. Being highly superstitious, she immediately sought guidance from a fortune teller inside the temple. The fortune teller told her that all misfortunes were caused by their own actions, and that only they themselves could resolve the karmic debt they had created. Terrified, Liang rushed home and told Wu everything. From that moment on, the couple began praying daily, seeking forgiveness and protection. Wu even prayed that if Deng Yingjie truly sought revenge, he would take his life instead, but spare their daughter. 1 month later, as if fate itself had answered, something returned. In October 1984, Liang went out again to consult a fortune teller. On her way, the vehicle she was traveling in suddenly lost control and overturned. She was thrown from the car and fell unconscious on the spot. Her companion also lost consciousness. When they regained awareness, they discovered that Liang Yukfang had stopped breathing. Her death was bizarre. There were no visible injuries on her body. During the accident, she had been thrown into a shallow puddle of water less than 5 centimeters deep, and, in that inexplicable position, she had drowned. Upon learning the cause of his wife's death, Wu became convinced that it was the revenge of Deng Yingjie's spirit. Years earlier, they had hidden Deng's body inside suitcases and sealed them in a water tank. Now, his wife had died in a mere few centimeters of water. To Wu, this could not be coincidence. He broke down in tears and told the police that he had lived in fear and psychological torment for years. In recent days, after hearing news that the body in the water tank had been discovered, his anxiety had only intensified. He also mentioned a witness statement claiming that years ago, several strong men were seen carrying an unconscious person onto the rooftop and throwing the body into the water tank. The witness had allegedly tried to intervene but was ignored. Wu knew the statement was not accurate, but it only deepened his mental distress. At the same time, being arrested brought him an unexpected sense of relief, as if a long-hidden burden had finally been lifted. However, the strange events did not end there. When police brought Wu to the second crime scene to reenact what had happened, a sudden cold draft swept through the enclosed room. The police video camera abruptly shut off. After some effort, they managed to restart the recording. But when they reviewed the footage, everyone felt a chill run down their spine. Each time the officer portraying Deng Yingjie appeared in frame, his face looked unnaturally blank and hollow, almost like a distorted special effect from a horror film. The entire scene felt deeply unsettling and inexplicable. Wu Chuktai was terrified to the core. Could it be that Deng Yingjie still refused to let him go? He frowned, and for a moment, a surge of anger flashed in his eyes. But just as quickly, that anger faded away. He felt that he had already lived through years of torment and guilt, perhaps he should simply pay back his debt with his life. As if sensing Wu's inner thoughts, when police escorted him around the scene once more and returned, everything suddenly seemed to return to normal. The reenactment proceeded without further incident. In July 1985, the case went to trial at the Hong Kong Supreme Court, with Wu Chuktai charged with murder. During the hearing, Wu confessed to all charges. Calmly standing in the dock, he awaited the verdict with no remaining hope for his future. However, the situation took an unexpected turn. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous decision. The court announced that Wu Chuktai was not guilty of murder and was acquitted on the spot. The jury concluded that Wu had acted in lawful self-defense and had no intention to kill. The judge noted that over the past 5 years, Wu had lived in constant psychological torment and remorse. Meanwhile, Deng Yingjie had been a notorious criminal during his lifetime, responsible for numerous offenses. In the court's view, his fate could be seen as a consequence of his own actions. Residents of the building also came forward to testify about Deng's behavior, and no one appeared willing to defend him. The To Kwa Wan water tank case shocked Hong Kong and sparked widespread public debate. Many questioned how such an incident could have occurred unnoticed on a public holiday like Tomb Sweeping Day. If a violent confrontation and murder had taken place, it seemed unlikely that neighbors would have heard nothing at all. Despite being acquitted, Wu Chuktai's life was forever changed. The once hopeful young man had been transformed by the weight of what had happened. After leaving the courthouse, exhaustion and deep emotional pain were still visible in his eyes. As he walked into the crowded streets, it felt as though only an empty void surrounded him. Even the bright summer sun of Hong Kong could not dispel the darkness within his heart. Though legally free, he remained imprisoned by his conscience. In the years that followed, he moved with his young daughter to a new place, far away from the haunting memories of the past. He never told his daughter about her mother, nor did he ever mention the name Dang Yingjie again. He threw himself into work, trying desperately to forget everything. Yet every night, when darkness fell, horrific memories of the case resurfaced, tormenting his mind. Wu understood that although the court had declared him innocent, he could never escape the judgment of his own conscience. The scar in his heart would remain with him for the rest of his life, reminding him of past mistakes and the irreversible cost of violence. The apartment residents who drank corpse-contaminated water case ultimately came to an end, but it left behind lasting fear and profound reflection. Beyond being a disturbing true crime story, it also became a cautionary tale about negligence, communal responsibility, and failures in residential oversight. The incident left hundreds of residents living in fear and uncertainty, raising serious questions about building safety and inspection standards. It is hoped that from this tragedy, authorities and communities alike will strengthen preventive measures to ensure safer and healthier living environments for everyone. See you all for the next cases. Please like and subscribe to my channel to support me.